The church was suffocating, the air thick with grief and unsaid words. The casket, draped in soft white flowers, sat at the front, the center of a scene full of mourning faces. The main character, a quiet figure in the front row, felt the weight of loss pressing down on them. Their heart ached for Grandma Rose, the one constant in a life marked by abandonment and silence. But today, it wasn't just sorrow they felt, it was confusion. Where had their parents been all these years? Then, without warning, the door creaked open. A chill swept over the room, like a shadow had entered. The main character's pulse quickened as they looked up, eyes narrowing. It was them. Their parents, dressed in somber black, stood in the doorway, silent, cold, and distant. Their faces betrayed no grief, only an unsettling calmness. They weren't here for Grandma. They were here for something else. The main character's chest tightened, heart hammering in their chest. After all these years, they never expected this, never expected them to show up, especially not now. What did they want? Why now? The air seemed to thicken with every step their parents took toward the front of the church, and a deep unease settled in the pit of the main character's stomach. The sun was setting when it happened. A cool breeze rustled the leaves outside Grandma Rose's house as an 8-year-old sat by the window looking out at the long, empty road. Her small hand pressed against the cold glass, eyes searching the horizon. "They'll be back soon," she told herself, whispering the words over and over, as if the repetition could make it true. Her parents had said it would be temporary. Just a phase, they promised. "Grandma will take care of you for a little while. We'll be back soon." But the days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and the months into years. Each morning, the character woke up, their small heart filled with hope that today might be the day. Every time a car passed down the street, they'd run to the window, but it was never their parents. It was always someone else. They would sit back down, shoulders slumped, staring out at the empty road again, feeling a hollow emptiness grow inside. Grandma Rose never explained why their parents had left. She never spoke about it. She simply went about her days, a kind and steady presence, offering love and comfort, but never the answers the child longed for. As the months wore on, the hurt and confusion grew. Why hadn't they come back? The question lingered, unanswered, until one day it became clear. They weren't coming back. Not today. Not ever. The character could feel the truth creeping in, like a dark shadow settling over their heart. They were unwanted, a mistake, abandoned. The pain was sharp, a constant ache that gnawed at them, and the deep loneliness settled in their chest, like a weight that never left. By the time they were 10, they stopped looking for their parents. They had learned to live without them. But the scar of that abandonment, that unanswered question, would follow them forever. Grandma Rose was more than just a guardian to the character. She was the rock that held everything together. From the moment she stepped in to take them in, her presence was a constant source of love and strength. She had a way of making even the darkest days feel like they could be overcome, simply with a kind word or a knowing smile. Her gentle nature was balanced by an unshakable wisdom and intelligence that the character admired deeply, even as a child. She taught them how to sew, how to read between the lines of a good book, and how to navigate life with grace and dignity, even when it seemed unfair. But what the character didn't fully understand at the time was just how much of a quiet powerhouse Grandma Rose was. Despite her modest home and humble appearance, she had a mind that could see opportunities others missed. She had built her life from nothing, starting a small, family-owned business that grew into a thriving empire. She never boasted about it, never spoke about the money she made or the deals she closed. But the character knew that Grandma Rose had something most people didn't, an unshakable sense of purpose and an understanding of the value of hard work. "Work hard and stay true to yourself," Grandma would often say. "The world will respect you for it, and success will follow." And it did. She had an eye for investments, for finding gold where others only saw dirt. She never allowed the character to feel like they weren't capable of achieving greatness too. In her eyes, they were destined for success, just as she had been. There was a quiet, hidden wealth to Grandma's life, not just in money, but in the legacy she had built. As the character grew older, they began to realize that the world Grandma Rose had created was far larger and more intricate than they'd ever imagined. But there was something else, something about her success that the character hadn't quite understood yet. It was all connected to a larger mystery. What had Grandma truly built? The phone call came in the middle of the night, its shrill ring slicing through the stillness of the house. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, shaky. "I'm so sorry to inform you, Grandma Rose, she's gone. It was a heart attack." For a moment, everything stopped. The world outside faded to nothing. The words didn't make sense. Gone. How could she be gone? Grandma, the one constant in the character's life, the one person who had always been there to offer comfort, guidance, love, was suddenly gone. The numbness came first, blanketing them in a fog of disbelief. She can't be gone. But there she was, gone. The character's chest felt like it was collapsing, but they couldn't bring themselves to cry, to feel anything but an overwhelming emptiness. Arrangements were made mechanically, like they were being done to someone else, not to the child who had once sat at Grandma Rose's feet, listening to her stories. They didn't know how to make sense of what was happening, how to move forward without her. The funeral passed in a haze, with faces passing in and out of view, whispers of condolences that felt like nothing but distant noise. "She's gone," they repeated silently in their mind, trying to make it feel real. But how can she be gone? The funeral was a blur. The scent of flowers, the quiet sobs of relatives, none of it seemed to touch them. The world felt detached, like they were watching from the outside. A cold weight settled over them, and as they stood beside Grandma's casket, they couldn't shake the sense that something was off. There was an unspoken tension in the air, something the character couldn't identify. A strange, nagging feeling. Something beyond the grief. But what? The finality of Grandma's death was overwhelming, but the deeper mystery gnawed at them. What was it? Something about this felt wrong, like a chapter was closing with more left unsaid than they had ever realized. The service was quiet, the air thick with the weight of loss. The character sat near the front, Grandma Rose's old silver necklace clutched tightly in their hand, the only tangible connection to the woman who had been both mother and guide. Their mind drifted in a haze, numb from grief, but then something stirred in the corner of their vision. A shadow loomed in the doorway, tall and familiar. Their heart skipped a beat. No, it was them. Their parents, dressed in black, their faces void of any real emotion, as though they had merely put on their grieving masks for show. The coldness in their eyes struck the character to the core. They hadn't seen them in years, not since the day they were left behind. And yet, here they were, standing at the threshold of the very place they had abandoned the character all those years ago. The parents moved slowly, making their way toward the front, their footsteps deliberate, calculated. They offered shallow words of sympathy, empty condolences that rang hollow in the character's ears. "I'm so sorry for your loss," the father said, his voice distant. The mother, her expression just as cold, nodded silently. The character's chest tightened, a mix of emotions flooding in: anger, disbelief, confusion. Why are they here now? After all these years of silence, after everything they had done, why did they show up at Grandma Rose's funeral? What do they want? They had abandoned the character without a second thought, leaving them to grow up alone with only Grandma for comfort. Now, standing before them, the weight of those years of abandonment pressed down like a suffocating cloud. The tension in the room thickened. Was this some kind of cruel gesture, an attempt at redemption, or something darker? The character stood up abruptly, heart pounding, fists clenched around the necklace. They had no idea how to react, whether to scream, to run, or to demand answers for the years of hurt they'd endured. One thing was clear: the silence between them was no longer enough. It was time to face them. Just as the tension in the room reached its peak, the door swung open once again, this time with a sharp, authoritative presence. A tall man stepped in, his black suit perfectly tailored, the leather briefcase in his hand gleaming under the dim lights of the church. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the charged atmosphere, and his every step seemed deliberate, measured. His arrival was as if he'd been expected all along. The quiet murmur of the room died instantly, all eyes turning toward him. The man surveyed the crowd briefly before locking eyes with the parents. With a slight nod, he spoke in a low, firm voice, cutting through the chaos like a knife. "I'm here on behalf of Grandma Rose," the lawyer said, his voice steady, almost clinical. "I'm sure you've all gathered here to mourn, but I'm afraid we have business to attend to." The character's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment when everything changed. The lawyer opened his briefcase slowly, pulling out a single sheet of paper. With a deliberate gesture, he turned it toward the parents. The room fell silent, the weight of the moment sinking in. "According to the will of the late Mrs. Rose," the lawyer continued, "she has left behind an inheritance, $50 million. However," he paused for effect, his gaze shifting to the character, who was still standing frozen, their heart pounding in their chest. "The will is clear. Character's name is the sole heir, not you." The parents' faces, once composed and cold, drained of all color. The father's lips parted, but no words came. The mother's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing with something darker, more desperate. The air in the room seemed to thicken with greed, the revelation of the inheritance making the character's stomach churn. The parents, who had abandoned them, had come here with a single purpose: the money. Their plan had been derailed by a piece of paper. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The tension between the family members was palpable. What would they do next? The lawyer's confident demeanor and the cold truth of the will had shattered any illusion of reconciliation. The character now stood at the center of a storm. What was once a moment of grief had become a battleground for something far more dangerous. The parents' reaction was immediate, and it was not what anyone had expected. The cold, calculated expressions they had worn so well now cracked, revealing the desperation and rage bubbling beneath the surface. The father's voice rose, sharp and demanding, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You don't understand," he spat, his words heavy with entitlement. "We are your parents. We have rights. We've put up with enough of this nonsense of Grandma Rose trying to keep everything from us." His eyes flickered toward the lawyer, as if hoping he could somehow take the side of the people who had given him life. "This isn't fair. You can't just leave everything to them." The mother's face twisted into something unrecognizable. "You think you're entitled to all of it?" she sneered. "We raised you. We gave you life. This money is ours, and you can't just shut us out like this." The character felt the anger rising in their chest, a searing heat that began to drown out the hollow ache of grief. This was no longer about money. This was about the years of hurt, the years of abandonment, the years of wondering why their parents had left without a word, without a second thought. "No." The character's voice cut through the tension, steady but firm. They stood taller, no longer the child who had waited by the window for parents who never came back. "You don't get to manipulate me anymore. You never cared about me then, and you sure as hell don't get to pretend you care about me now." The words stung like a slap, but they were necessary. This moment wasn't just about claiming what was rightfully theirs, it was about asserting their worth, their dignity, and the boundaries that had been violated for too long. "I'm not your pawn, and I'm not some mistake you can fix with money," the character continued, their voice unwavering. "You abandoned me when I was a child. You can't come back now and pretend that everything will just be handed to you." The parents' faces faltered, their masks slipping completely. The father's jaw clenched, and the mother's eyes burned with an unsettling fury. But the character stood tall, heart pounding, knowing this was the moment they had to hold their ground. The room was thick with tension. The audience held their breath, waiting to see if the parents would relent or if the character would finally be broken by the pressure. But in this moment, the character was resolute. They had already been broken once, but never again. The lawyer had remained quiet throughout the tense exchange, observing the scene with an air of detached professionalism. His calm, unwavering demeanor contrasted sharply with the parents' growing desperation. Then, after a long silence, he finally spoke, his voice smooth but edged with something resembling amusement. "I think it's time we bring this to a close," the lawyer said, his lips curling into a small, almost mocking smile. "I'd advise you both to understand something very clearly. You have no legal claim to this inheritance." His words were firm, every syllable laced with the finality of a legal document. "The will is binding, and any further attempts to manipulate the situation will only make things more complicated for you. I'm sure neither of you wants to face that." The weight of his words sank in like a stone dropped in still water. The parents stood frozen, their faces slowly draining of color as the realization hit them. There was nothing they could do. Their attempts at manipulation, their demand for what they believed was rightfully theirs, had been in vain. The law had spoken, and it had already chosen a side. The father's hands shook slightly as he shoved them into his pockets, avoiding the character's gaze. The mother's lips trembled, but she said nothing. They were defeated, their greed exposed for everyone to see. The tension in the room eased, but the sting of the past still lingered. The character looked at their parents, no longer the child who once longed for their love and approval. They were still hurt, still carrying the weight of years of abandonment, but they no longer felt helpless. A quiet sense of relief washed over them, an unexpected sense of freedom. For the first time in their life, they felt truly in control, not just of the inheritance, but of their own future. They no longer needed their parents to define their worth or their success. They had already learned, from Grandma Rose, that strength came from within. The lawyer gave a brief nod to the character, signaling the end of the confrontation. As the parents slowly turned and exited, their departure felt like the final curtain falling on a chapter long overdue for closure. With the inheritance now firmly in their hands, the character stood taller than they ever had before. The past would always be there, but the future was theirs to shape. And this time, they would do it on their terms. As the dust settled and the finality of the moment took hold, the character stood in the quiet of the church, reflecting on everything that had brought them here. The years of abandonment, the loneliness, the questions that had remained unanswered, they had all led to this point. The grief of losing Grandma Rose was still fresh, but now the weight of the past felt different. They were no longer a child waiting for answers. They were no longer defined by the absence of their parents. Through everything, the betrayal, the silence, the pain, they had learned one undeniable truth. They were the master of their own destiny. The inheritance, the money, it was just a symbol. The real gift Grandma Rose had given them was something far more valuable, the strength to move forward, to live on their own terms. The character knew now that they didn't need the approval of those who had abandoned them. They had always been enough. As they stood there, looking out toward the future, the weight of it all finally lifted, and a sense of peace settled in. In the end, Grandma left me more than just money. She left me the strength to stand on my own.